In 1983, a single cloud almost triggered World War III. Soviet computers confirmed 5 American nuclear missiles were in the air. The order was to fire back. But one man chose to disobey. This is how Stanislav Petrov saved your life by trusting his gut over the machine. September 26, 1983. The world was breathing through a gas mask. Inside the Serpukhov 15 bunker, hidden deep within the forest south of Moscow, the air was recycled and smelled of ozone and stale tobacco. This was the nerve center of the Soviet Union's space-based early warning system, codenamed OKO. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sat in the commander's chair, surrounded by high-ranking technicians and the low hum of mainframe computers that occupied entire rooms. His task was the ultimate weight: to monitor the satellites that looked down upon the United States, searching for the unmistakable infrared signature of a nuclear launch. At this exact moment in history, the doomsday clock was closer to midnight than ever before. NATO was on the verge of launching Able Archer 83, a massive military exercise that the Kremlin was convinced was a cover for a real first strike. The Soviet leadership was paranoid, their fingers hovering over the launch buttons of thousands of ICBMs. Then, at precisely 14 minutes past midnight, the silence of the bunker was pulverized. A crimson light, bright and violent, erupted on the main overhead display. The word START, in Cyrillic, began to pulse like a dying heart. The sirens followed, a deafening, mechanical shriek that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bone. The OKO satellite, orbiting high above the American Midwest, had detected a launch. A single Minuteman missile had left its silo in North Dakota and was now arching through the atmosphere, destined for Soviet soil. Petrov felt the blood drain from his face. His training took over a cold, robotic sequence of checks. But before he could even process the first signal, the computer screamed again. A second missile, then a third. Within seconds, the screen was a chaotic map of 5 incoming nuclear warheads. This was not a drill. The system was reporting a high reliability detection. In the Soviet military hierarchy, the computer was God. If the computer said there was a launch, the protocol was absolute. The duty officer must immediately notify the general staff. From there, the decision to retaliate would take less than 5 minutes. Petrov gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white. He was looking at the end of the human race on a flickering green monitor. Every man in that bunker was staring at him, waiting for the word that would unleash 1,000 suns upon the Western world. But Petrov, a man trained in engineering as much as combat, saw a shadow of a doubt. The strategy of the United States, as the Soviet understood it, was based on a massive, overwhelming first strike designed to decapitate Soviet leadership and destroy their retaliatory capability. Why would they only fire 5 missiles? It made no tactical sense. It was a pinprick against a giant. He looked at the ground-based radar screens. They remained hauntingly empty. The ground radar, however, had a limited horizon. By the time they saw the missiles, it would be too late to fire back. He had to decide now. Is the satellite lying, or is the radar blind? The pressure was a physical weight, crushing his chest. He had the direct line to the Kremlin in his hand. One sentence from his mouth would mean the death of 100 million people in the first hour. He took a breath, his lungs feeling like they were filled with glass, and he made the call. But he didn't report a launch. He reported a system malfunction. He told his superiors that the most advanced technology in the Soviet arsenal was hallucinating. It was a gamble of such magnitude that it defies human comprehension. If he was wrong, he was allowing 5 nuclear warheads to strike his motherland without warning. He would be the greatest traitor in history, responsible for the deaths of his own people. He hung up the phone and waited. The bunker went silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the master clock. They had approximately 10 minutes before the projected impact. 10 minutes to find out if the world would continue to exist, or if it would be vaporized in a sequence of blinding flashes. Petrov watched his men. Some were praying silently. Others were staring blankly at their screens, waiting for the impact that would turn the bunker into a tomb. The minutes were agonizing. Each second felt like a year. They monitored the communications from the cities, waiting for the reports of explosions that would never come if he was right, or that would cut off mid-sentence if he was wrong. 5 minutes passed. 7 minutes. The projected flight paths of the American missiles reached their targets on the display. And then, something miraculous happened. Nothing. The targets remained. The sensors remained silent. There were no flashes of light over the horizon. The world did not end. Stanislav Petrov had saved every person on this planet by simply refusing to believe his own computers. But the true horror was yet to be discovered. The investigation that followed would be buried under layers of Soviet secrecy for decades. What the technicians found was a flaw so simple it was terrifying. The Oko satellite had been positioned in a specific Molniya orbit. At that exact time of year, and at that exact hour, the sun, the satellite, and the high-altitude clouds over North Dakota had aligned in a way that had never occurred before. The sun's reflection off the ice crystals in the clouds had perfectly mimicked the thermal bloom of a rocket engine. The Soviet Union's infallible defense system had been defeated by a reflection in a cloud. This revelation was so embarrassing to the Soviet military that Petrov was not rewarded. He was reprimanded for failing to fill out the proper paperwork during the crisis and eventually pushed into early retirement. He died in obscurity, but his legacy is the very fact that we are here to tell this story. This was the closest the world ever came to total nuclear winter, a ghost in the machine that nearly triggered the final war. The aftermath of the Serpukhov 15 incident did not bring relief. It brought a cold, calculated terror to the Soviet high command. While the public remained blissfully unaware that they had been minutes away from extinction, the Kremlin began a frantic, secret audit of every electronic they had in space. They realized that their entire defense strategy was built on a foundation of digital sand. The investigation into the Oko system's failure revealed that the software designers had never accounted for the specific angle of the sun during the autumnal equinox. It was a mathematical oversight that could have burned the world to a cinder. But the danger of 1983 was not limited to a single faulty satellite. This was the year of living dangerously. Just weeks after Petrov's harrowing night, NATO began Able Archer 83. This wasn't just another exercise. It was a full-scale simulation of a transition from conventional to nuclear war. The Soviets, still reeling from the Petrov incident, were convinced that the exercise was a ruse. They believed the West was using the noise of the drill to mask an actual mobilization. In response, the Soviet Union did something unprecedented. They readied their own nuclear forces. In East Germany and Poland, nuclear-capable aircraft were placed on 24-hour strip alert, their engines warming up, their pilots sitting in the cockpits with the launch codes in their hands. The world was a tinderbox, and both sides were holding flamethrowers. This period, now known to historians as the War Scare, was arguably more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev were talking. In 1983, the lines of communication were dead. Reagan had famously called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and the Soviet leadership viewed Reagan as a religious fanatic who was prepared to start Armageddon. The Petrov incident was the spark that almost hit the powder. If Petrov had followed his orders, the Soviet retaliation would have been massive. Their dead-hand system, a terrifying automated response mechanism designed to fire all missiles, even if the leadership was dead, was being finalized. The logic was grim. If we die, everyone dies. The documents declassified from the KGB archives years later show that the Soviet military was in a state of hypervigilance. Every radar blip, every atmospheric anomaly, was being scrutinized through the lens of imminent war. The psychological toll on the officers inside these bunkers was immense. They were living in a permanent state of high-intensity stress, told every day that the Americans were coming. This environment is what makes Petrov's decision even more extraordinary. He broke a decade of indoctrination to listen to his intuition. He was a man who understood that technology is only as good as the humans who interpret it. The technical breakdown of the Oko failure is a masterclass in engineering catastrophe. The satellites used a specialized telescope with a narrow field of view. When the sunlight hit the clouds at a specific 15-degree angle, the infrared sensors were overwhelmed. The computer, programmed to recognize specific heat signatures, saw exactly what it was told to look for: the ignition of a rocket. It was a perfect false positive. This failure forced the Soviet Union to completely redesign their early warning constellation. But the damage to their confidence was permanent. They realized they were blind in the dark, relying on sensors that could be fooled by the weather. Meanwhile, in the United States, the intelligence community was starting to pick up signals that the Soviets were genuinely terrified. When Reagan was finally briefed on how close the Soviets had come to launching a strike during Able Archer, he was visibly shaken. He realized that his rhetoric, combined with technological failures like the one Petrov faced, had brought the world to the brink. This realization led to the eventually thawing of the Cold War and the signing of major nuclear arms treaties. But the secret of Stanislav Petrov stayed hidden until 1998, when the memoirs of his superior officer were published. Only then did the world learn the name of the man who saved them. We live in an era now where AI and automated systems make more decisions than ever before. We trust algorithms to fly our planes, manage our markets, and monitor our borders. But the go signal of 1983 stands as a permanent warning. It tells us that no matter how advanced the machine, the final failsafe must always be human. Without Petrov's hesitation, without his willingness to defy the machine, there would be no history left to record. The silence of the North Dakota clouds that night was almost the silence of a dead planet. As we look at the rising tensions in the modern world, the story of the 1983 go signal isn't just a history lesson. It is a blueprint for survival in an age of automated destruction. The legacy of the 1983 crisis extends far beyond the cold walls of the Serpukhov 15 bunker. It forced a fundamental shift in how the two superpowers communicated, or rather, how they realized they had stopped communicating altogether. When Stanislav Petrov made his choice, he wasn't just fighting a machine. He was fighting a culture of absolute obedience that defined the Soviet military apparatus. In the Soviet Union, questioning the computer was seen as questioning the state itself. The investigation that followed his insubordination was brutal. Instead of receiving a medal, Petrov was interrogated for hours. They wanted to know why he hadn't followed the manual. They wanted to know why he hadn't documented every single heartbeat of the crisis in the official logbook. The reality was that Petrov had been too busy preventing the apocalypse to worry about administrative paperwork. This bureaucratic coldness is a stark reminder of how close humanity came to being a footnote in history. While Petrov was being disciplined, the Soviet Union was quietly scrambling to fix the Oko system's algorithms. They realized that their reliance on high-orbit satellites had a fatal flaw. The geometry of the Sun and the Earth was more complex than their programmers had anticipated. But even as they fixed the software, the hardware of the Cold War remained on a hair trigger. The 1980s were a decade of ghost signals. On several occasions, U.S. systems also reported incoming Soviet attacks that turned out to be technical glitches, or, in one famous case, a training tape that had been accidentally loaded into a live computer. We were living in a hall of mirrors, where every reflection looked like a nuclear missile. The psychological impact on the leadership of both nations was profound. When Ronald Reagan eventually learned the full details of the Petrov incident and the intensity of the Soviet fear during Able Archer 83, his stance changed. The evil empire rhetoric was softened, and the path to the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was paved. He realized that a war started by computer error was just as dead as a war started by a dictator. This is the hidden history of the 20th century. The peace we enjoyed was not just the result of diplomacy, but the result of a few individuals who refused to be cogs in a doomsday machine. Petrov lived out the rest of his life in a modest apartment in Fryazino, surviving on a small pension, largely forgotten by the country he had saved from total destruction. Today, as we enter a new era of global tension, the lessons of 1983 are more relevant than ever. We are now integrating artificial intelligence into our command and control structures at an unprecedented rate. The speed of modern hypersonic missiles means that the decision window for a human commander has shrunk from 10 minutes to less than 3. We are moving toward a world of hyperwar, where the machines talk to machines, and the human is increasingly pushed out of the loop. If a go signal were to happen today, would there be another Petrov to stop it? Or would the algorithms conclude, with cold and perfect logic, that a strike is the only rational response? This is why the story of September 26th, 1983, must be told and retold. It is a reminder that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is not a nuclear warhead, but the human capacity to say no to the machine. The silence that followed the false alarm in the bunker was the most important silence in human history. It was the silence of a planet that didn't burn. It was the silence of billions of people who woke up the next morning, went to work, and kissed their children, never knowing how close they had come to never waking up at all. Stanislav Petrov passed away in 2017, but his story remains the ultimate testament to human judgment. As we look at the rising geopolitical storms of the 21st century, we must hope that the men and women behind the screens today possess the same courage to doubt, the same wisdom to hesitate, and the same humanity to choose life over protocol. The go signals are still out there, lurking in the code, waiting for the right alignment of the sun and the clouds. The final irony of Petrov's life is that he never considered himself a hero. He often said in interviews that he was simply the right man in the right place at the right time. But in a world designed for total destruction, being the right man is the most heroic thing anyone can be. The documents declassified after the fall of the Berlin Wall have given us a window into this nightmare. But many more stories likely remain buried in the archives of the Kremlin and the Pentagon. We may never know all the times we almost disappeared. What we do know is that our survival depends on the thin line between a machine's data and a human's conscience. That is the true cost of peace in the nuclear age. We survived 1983 because of one man's hesitation. Today, AI makes those decisions in milliseconds. The next go signal might not have a Petrov to stop it. History is a warning, and we are running out of time. Don't forget the man who saved the world. Subscribe for more declassified truths.